We're also working proactively to stop the misuse of the internet by terrorists and violent extremists. They are exploiting social media and other online platforms to spread dangerous propaganda, recruit new members, and promote and incite violence and hatred. More and more on the internet, toxic rhetoric is breaking into the mainstream. It's open and it's brazen. A disturbing aspect of the Christchurch attack is that it was not only streamed over the internet in real time, but also shared by many people online. In fact, the original video of that massacre was viewed some 4,000 times before being removed. Al-Qaeda and Daesh circulate material that is easily accessible on the internet, like magazines and videos on how to carry out bombings and other acts of violence. Violent extremists exploit discussion forums and networks, offering them a borderless community to create a culture of fear, mistrust, and violence. All of this has contributed to a serious issue of radicalization to violence in Canada and around the world. It sprouts and simmers online, but spills into the real world. You see it in harassment, in anonymous letters, in defaced places of worship, in acts of violence, and in the very worst cases, murder. The Quebec mosque attacker, for example, was known to consume far-right content online before embarking on his murderous rampage. Canada is working hard to help counter and prevent the insidious process of radicalization to violence before tragedy strikes. This demands a whole-of-society approach. When leaders and opinion makers fail to denounce hatred with total conviction, we empower and legitimize those who espouse that hatred. We are undertaking our work in close collaboration with our international partners, with civil society, and with the digital industry. This is a constant topic of concern among security ministers from the G7 and the Five Eyes countries, for example, and it will be again next month at the next Five Eyes Summit in the UK. There is complete agreement that we must all do more to ensure that dangerous content is removed a lot faster than it currently is, and to prevent it from going up in the first place. Social media platforms have a very essential role to play in that process. They need to move more quickly, efficiently, and precisely in dealing with the toxic and violent material posted or shared by their users. Big technology companies need to assist and support the smaller ones, and all players need to be more transparent and more accountable with respect to the algorithms they utilize to serve content to their users. To that end, Prime Minister Trudeau recently joined New Zealand Prime Minister Ardern and French President Macron, other government leaders, and leaders from the tech sector to adopt the Christchurch Call to Action. As part of the Christchurch Call, governments and online service providers are making voluntary, collective commitments to prevent abuse of the internet to promote and sensationalize acts of terrorism. Today, Canada is adding 2 new initiatives that will help Canada meet its commitments under the Christchurch Call. First, the Government of Canada is committing $1 million in funding to the UN-affiliated Tech Against Terrorism initiative to support small technology companies in their efforts to remove violent extremist content and to protect against terrorist use of their services. Many of these smaller companies are often very willing, very anxious to do their part, but they lack the capacity or the knowledge or the financial resources to do so. Tech Against Terrorism helps to fill that gap, helping small companies to rid themselves of terrorist activity and to make themselves more resilient. The funding announced by Canada today will support Tech Against Terrorism's content analytics platform. This project will create a repository of terrorist content, Smaller tech companies will be notified when new material is discovered online and added to the repository, and that will make it easier for those companies to identify and more quickly remove any of that material on their own platforms. We also want to engage with youth on this issue. Young people understand the online environment. In fact, they live the majority of their lives in it and can help transmit effective alternative narratives. That's why I am also announcing today that the Government of Canada will be collaborating on a youth summit on countering violent extremism online, and that should be taking place later on this summer. The summit will bring together young people to learn about violent extremist and terrorist use of the internet, dissuade peers from sharing content, and develop effective counter-narrative campaigns to push back against nefarious content. Representatives from internet companies will help shape the event and collaborate directly with youth to develop good ideas that can be shared broadly with their peers. These initiatives that I'm announcing today complement action that is already being taken by the Government of Canada to address the use of the internet by terrorists and violent extremists. In fact, that was one of the priorities of the National Strategy on Countering Radicalization to Violence, which we announced last December. In addition to working with digital industry, we're also working with civil society and with the private sector to improve digital literacy so people can know extremist content when they see it and can be more resilient to the manipulation that so often lures people toward increasingly radical and dangerous messages. And we are supporting research to better understand how terrorists and violent extremist groups operate in the online space and how to counter their activities. All of these efforts are being led by the Canada Centre for Community Engagement and Prevention of Violence, and that includes a prominent advisory council chaired by Peter Slowly and Gheda Hassan. The Canada Centre has been up and running now for 2.5 years, and it has done a lot of very important work. That includes funding for timely interventions that help to prevent at-risk individuals from being radicalized to violence in the first place, and supporting disengagement programs for those that are already on that downward spiral. Moonshot CVE is an excellent example of the programming supported by the Canada Centre through its Community Resilience Fund. It's providing alternative, positive counter messages to vulnerable individuals who are searching for violent extremist or terrorist material. We're also funding research into the attitudes and experiences of young Canadians toward hate speech and hateful material online. That research found that young Canadians are being affected by online hate. 70% of those surveyed said that they would be more likely to push back against that hate if the platforms had clear rules and the tools to report bad behavior. The study also found that when online hate is left unchecked, young people can start to falsely believe that intervening is overreacting, and thus hate becomes normalized. Canadians like to believe that we are the finest expression of pluralism, diversity, and mutual respect that the world has ever known. But that is always a precious work in progress that we dare not take for granted, especially in a deeply divided and troubled world in which new information technology is constantly enabling new messages of fear and hate and violence, just as much as messages about peace and tolerance and inclusion. So we need to remain vigilant and proactive as we work our way through all of the action items from the Christchurch calls and our ongoing work as well with the Five Eyes, the G7, and others.